Welcome to our Mixed Faith Marriage Mastermind panel discussion, where we talk about all different topics related to mixed faith marriages as three coaches who deal with mixed faith marriages in different capacities. And we are all in different parts of the belief spectrum related to the church, different levels of participation or non-participation. And our mixed faith families all look different. And so we are here to share our personal and professional thoughts about the topic today, which is about how much do I share with my kids about my beliefs or about my faith or about my change of faith. And this is something that inevitably comes up with couples that I work with, and I'm sure you guys have seen this too. And it often involves conflict and uncertainty and frustration and a loss of what to do related to this topic of sharing beliefs. Especially, I'm seeing a lot of this year since it's Doctrine and Covenants year at church. I'm hearing this a lot, like how much do I share about church history with my kids and things like that. So it might be about whether to share the actual belief status of a parent if they no longer believe. It might be about whether to share uncomfortable church history with the kids and when and how much and what's age appropriate, how to share about beliefs without having to walk on eggshells around the other parent, whether to share authentically with the kids about your beliefs and values, and whether or not the other parent should be aware of and involved in this sharing process. So the questions around this topic could fill pages because there's often so much anxiety and people feel like they're walking a very difficult line of wanting to share their beliefs and values and not wanting to upset the balance of the relationship. People often worry if sharing more authentically with the kids will hurt their relationship with their spouse. They worry about confusing the kids if they're sharing conflicting views. They worry about how, when, and what to what extent they should share their knowledge, perspective, faith, and views. Every family is different. We do not claim to have the answers for your family or your situation, but we do want to discuss this topic to give you some general things to consider as you navigate this aspect of a mixed faith marriage. Maybe you'll come away with some things to guide you in this sensitive area. So let's jump in like we usually do with sharing our own experiences around this, around navigating how to share, what to share, when to share with our kids. So whoever wants to jump in and start sharing about their journey with this.
I'm happy to share. I just remember, so this was a long time ago for me. My kids were fairly little at the time, and I went into I doubled down my efforts because so I'm the active believing member, and all of a sudden I felt like, okay, because my husband's not doing this, I need to do his part and my part. So I went kind of crazy. I went into, as I call, monkey mode, where I felt like I had to do all the things. So, like, we're going to make sure to do all the prayers and family home evening every week and all the activities. And I felt like they should have all the articles of faith memorized. And I really went full bore. And looking back, I really noticed that I was focusing my efforts on what I thought they needed. So, kind of like, I have to teach them about this so they won't leave the church. And in hindsight, I feel like if I could go back and do things differently, instead of trying to create the perfect spiritual experience for them, I wish I would have just focused on mine instead of trying to make them be something. I wish I would have focused on me more because I was so focused on making that situation perfect for them that I kind of turned into a crazy lady, and I missed out on the opportunity to get what I needed out of a lot of experiences. So that's one thing that I wish I could do is focus on my experience instead of trying to create the perfect experience for them because it really backfired.
I'm kind of laughing because I think I had my own like crazy mom version of that story. So, I left, like I stopped attending is probably a more accurate way of saying it. And at first I tried really hard not to rock the boat on parenting. Like I didn't speak up even when I wanted to because I knew how important it was because I was that parent like not that long ago. Like I knew what it meant to have somebody come in and rock the parenting boat, if you will. And so I was really cautious about that. And so then that meant I bottled it in, right? I kept it in until I couldn't keep it in anymore. And it would come out in inopportune times and inopportune ways because I wasn't giving it any sort of outlet. I knew how sensitive parenting is, and you're supposed to keep your kids in the faith and safe, like no matter what. And I felt like I was a threat to that. And it was challenging, but I had to learn over time that I couldn't keep it all in and keep showing up the way I wanted to. And I had to learn how to talk about it and express it in ways that worked, because not talking about it and not expressing it didn't help anybody.
I love both of those. And let me just say, Chris, if my situation had been reversed, if my husband had had the faith journey, I would have been you. I was the type of
Me
person I totally would have
too.
doubled down. So
Me too.
yeah. So totally get that. But in my situation, I was the one that had the faith shift. And I kind of like you, I was very cautious and I really didn't share. And it was more of a reactivity, like a response coming from reactivity. Like, I'm afraid, I don't want to rock the boat, I don't want to mess things up, I don't want to create conflict. And so I just didn't share. And that kind of in time morphed more into just sharing generally. I just kind of shared generally with my kids, like, I don't really agree with the stance of the church on this, but I don't really go into sharing a lot of details unless my kids ask specific questions, is kind of how I've approached it. And now I've kind of shifted into just more really intentional, trying to think intentionally, like, what do I want to share and why? And when do I think is appropriate to share? So a lot more like thoughtfulness around it. Whereas initially it was very reactive, where I wasn't sharing and kind of bottling it up. But I still felt this urgency, like, I got to teach my kids, I got to share, I got to. So there was a lot of urgency and I just didn't share. And it's kind of morphed into a more healthy place, but it wasn't healthy at first. That's for sure. So I think
I'm
we can
glad
all
it wasn't just
agree.
me.
I think we can all agree that we just reacted in certain ways, and that we all agree that that reactivity in different forms wasn't helpful. All right, so let's put this in the bigger context of the parenting journey that we're all on, because parenting is such a journey. It's easy to feel like there's a best way to parent, the right way to parent. And if we do it wrong, we're going to mess up our kids forever. Whether we don't teach them enough about the church or against the church, then it's going to affect them forever and they'll stay in or they'll leave. And so there's a lot of parenting anxiety, a lot of weight that we can carry on our shoulders as parents about, like, if we're messing our kids up by sharing, by not sharing, by not doing it right. So what are your thoughts about handling this kind of weight that we carry as parents, of fear of doing it right or wrong or messing our kids up?
I think it's really important to just put it out there. We are going to mess our kids up, just period. That not intentionally, but that's part of this, the dynamics of a relationship, that there are going to be times where we don't show up as our best selves. And I think it's really important to remember that there's no one perfect way to do things. I think we have this idea that there's like this perfect little package that we can tie up with a bow. And I don't think there really is. There's so many different ways to be a good parent. One of my very favorite things that I like to remember is that I am a 50-50 mom. And what I mean by that, half the time I'm going to show up and I'm going to do a great job. I'm going to be a rock star. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be articulate. I'm going to be really understanding and curious and loving. And the other half of the time, I'm not. I'm going to do things I wish I hadn't done or say things that were not considerate. And I think it's really important to remember that we are humans as parents. We are not going to be perfect. And when we have this expectation that we are going to be perfect parents, it makes it really, really hard because we will mess up. So when I am in a situation where I do mess up, and I do, just having a lot of compassion for myself. And a lot of times I'll say, yep, there I go being a human again. There I go being a 50-50 parent. I'm half the time I'm a rock star and half the time I'm a hot mess, just like every other parent out there. So I think just having that compassion for that we are going to mess up, and it's part of life.
This is so interesting because I was thinking along very similar lines that, like, look back to our original stories, like our personal stories. We were taking it way too seriously. And I think most parents take parenting way too seriously. The type of pressure we put on ourselves, the expectations we put on ourselves as parents is intense. And when we're so serious, we tend to be more rigid and controlling and full of fear. And then you layer on top of that a faith transition that puts two people's at, two people at odds, and it feels like, two generals of an opposing army trying to figure things out. They feel very threatened by each other. Both parents so full of fear and anxiety that they're going to mess up their kids, right? They're taking it so seriously, and they're so invested in being parents that it sabotages themselves in being parents. So I think so much of dealing with this is like taking a deep breath, taking a step back, and realize that, like, we don't have to be perfect parents, like Chris is saying, but also like managing your anxieties, managing your fears, letting your spouse work through their anxieties and their fears, and not, like, sometimes it just all comes out in the parenting platform, if you will, because that's where we don't want to compromise. That's where we feel most justified in not compromising and most justified in holding a firm line and pushing through for good reasons. But again, if we're taking it so seriously, we get rigid or fear. It's just an area to maybe soften a little bit around.
Yeah, I totally agree. One thing that's really helping me lately is just remembering the trajectory of their life is long, and who knows what elements are going to be helpful or not helpful. And there's a Taoist parable that I love, and I'm going to just share a really kind of quick version of it. The Chinese farmer, and I think this is so applicable to mixed faith parenting. So once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer whose horse ran away. And that evening, all the neighbors came to commiserate. Oh, we're so sorry. That's so unfortunate that your horse ran away. And the farmer said, maybe. And then the next day, the horse came back bringing 7 wild horses with it. And all the people in the town came back and said, oh, isn't that so great? Isn't that so lucky that all these horses came back? And the farmer said, maybe. And then the following day, his son tried to break in one of these wild horses. And while he was riding, he was thrown and he broke his leg. And all the neighbors and everyone said, oh no, this is so horrible. I'm so sorry. And then the next day, the conscription officers came to recruit people into the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. And all the neighbors came around and said, oh, isn't that wonderful? And he said, maybe. And I love that because you never know what an event means. We attach this meaning to it, that it's good or it's bad. Like, oh, kids staying in the church is good. Kids leaving the church is good. But we don't know what events might follow and what meaning, whether it's going to be helpful to them in their life or not helpful, because there's so much that we don't know about their trajectory and the things that'll happen. So that's really helpful to me, just to not assign things as good or bad. And that helps me to realize, like, I don't know if I'm messing up my kids or not. The ways that I might feel like I'm messing them up might actually serve them well someday. And the ways that I think I'm doing awesome might actually be a hindrance to them. I have no idea. So it just helps me to relax and be like, I'm just going to do what I can, what I think is best, and let go of the outcome. Because maybe my parenting will be helpful or not helpful. I don't know. It's hard to say. So that was helpful to me. So let's talk about the illusion of control in parenting. What can we control regarding our children's spiritual journey? What can't we control? What is our responsibility in this area of spirituality, religion, church, any of that? What are we trying to control that's not ours to control? Any of that. Thoughts about control?
It makes me laugh out loud.
Yeah, right. Like, I know what Chris and I are both going to say, and I suspect you too, is that nothing. Like, we control nothing about our kids. Yet we influence, we advise, we consult, but we have no control ultimately. Like, they are the CEO of their own life. You consult, they may or may not listen to that. And I think so often when parents struggle to separate their identity, their goodness, their worth from their kids' behavior, because they don't separate those, and so then you have to go in and control because it's so personal. When we tie those things together, we become controlling and authoritative, but the truth is nothing we're controlling there. It's just not a thing.
And I think it can be helpful to make a T chart because we think that we have a lot more, we can influence, we can definitely influence, but I like to like literally make a T chart. What is in my control and what is not in my control? So some examples of things that are in my control, my reaction and how I behave. What's not in my control? My child's emotions. The example that I set, that's in my control. How my children believe, that's not in my, how I communicate with my child, that's in my control. How my child interprets what I said, that's not in my control. So I think literally writing down what is in my control and what's not, because I think so often that, like Brooke was saying, their results, they are not in our control. And going off another thing that you said, Brooke, it's so easy to determine our success by the results that our children are creating for them and say like, oh, I'm not a successful parent. And I think it is so important to base our success off of what is in our control. So I can't control if my kids, what they believe, what they do, what they think, what they say. What is in my control is how I show up as a parent. So I want to base my success off of what is in my control. So I personally have a couple of things that I think of that I measure my success from. Do I love my children? Do I share what I think is important with them? Do I show up for them? Do I try to be the mom that I want to be? That's in my control. What they do with that, that's not in my control. So I can be a rock star, successful parent, and they can have very different results than I thought they would have, and I can still be a successful parent. So I think just defining what success is based off of what's in our control, I think is so important.
Definitely. I think you guys probably are more experienced. My oldest is 16, so I am just in those teenage years with my first, and that was a huge shocker. I thought I had a lot more control than I did when they were little, and I was like, I am shaping them to be the kind of person I want them to be, and then they hit those teenage years and it's like, nope, apparently they're their own person. And it was quite shocking to me, and it's been quite an adjustment for me to really realize how little control I have and all the shaping I thought I was doing. Well, they're their own person and they're just gonna ignore it. So it's been really a journey for me to kind of let go of control, religious wise or non-religious wise. All I control is how I live my own values. I can't even control what my kids value. I can't control whether they even enjoy thinking about bigger existential questions. I can't control any of that. I can only control how I live my faith or not faith or my spirituality. Like you said at the beginning, Chris, your story, you wish you would have just focused on your self and your experience. And that's what I'm learning in my own parenting. I can just live what I think is important. That's all I can do.
Can I
Any
share
other?
a funny story?
Mhm.
When my daughter she was probably like 3, she was really little. And I took both of my kids to the Instacare because my son had a sore throat, and they were swabbing my son, and they said, okay, if he has a sore throat, then we're going to have to swab her as well. And so they went, and the doctor left the room, and I turned around and my sweet little daughter had knelt down and was saying a prayer. And I was like, oh my word, this is like perfect parenting moment. And I was so proud of myself and just patting myself on the back. And sh and when she stood up, I said, I'm so proud of you that you said a prayer. That's what I would do too when I'm nervous or scared. And she stands up and she looks at me, and she's 3. It's not like she's 16. I said, what did you pray for? And she said, I prayed that all the doctors in the land would die. And I was like, oh, never mind. I don't have anything to do with that. But it was just so funny because it was like, okay, then here we go. And luckily that didn't come true. But yeah, even when we think we have control, we don't have control.
Yeah, it's true. That's funny. Any other thoughts about control before we talk about controlling our spouse? All right, well then let's move on to the
Controlling
parenting.
spouse. Yeah, I think the controlling spouse, they overlap a lot.
Yes. So what are your thoughts about giving your spouse space to share what they want to share, to have their own unique relationship with the kids, to talk about the things they want to talk about with the kids and not trying to control that? What are your thoughts about that?
I've got lots of thoughts on this too. So, in when we started this off, we were two very different people. And my husband, he would just always say that he supported me and he would never share his beliefs. And I just kind of thought like, this is so amazing. I don't have to deal with this. I can teach my kids whatever I want. And it's interesting as we were talking about this, he was like, you didn't really give me, I would freak out if he went against what I said. And I didn't make it easy for him to share his beliefs, which I wish I could change that. I can't. I can change it now, but I did not create an environment where he really could share. And I think it created a lot of, that's a big breeding ground for resentment, his resentment, and also my kids, because he didn't really share. And so it's like, well, why didn't dad tell me? Why didn't dad tell me what he thought about this? And looking back, it's like, well, because I would have cried for 3 days. So I think it's so important to, although it was nice that he wasn't saying terrible things about the church, but that's not who he is. But in hindsight, I wish I would have invited more dialogue and found out how did he, what was his stance on different things? Because it's definitely something that we are working on now.
Yeah, that's interesting because what helped me the most in this particular thing is this thought that I get to parent how I want and he gets to parent how he wants. Like we both equally have the right to parent how we want, even if it's opposite. Like we both have that right. And it was so helpful to me to not saying I was perfect at this, but to like let him have his parenting experience and then let myself have my parenting experience. This was pivotal in me learning how to speak up too. But I want to talk about something I see a lot with my clients on this particular topic, and that is I see parents wanting to come in and do what I call like negative parenting. Like what I mean by that is they come in wanting to block, protect, eliminate things in their children's life. And they spend a lot of energy blocking, protecting, and eliminating things. So it might be eliminating the spouse from saying something, or eliminating an interaction here, or eliminating an influence here. Or they're always like blocking and protecting, and they spend all of their parenting effort in this, and it's hard because things are coming in all directions and they're constantly doing that. And it's exhausting and it's hard. And a lot of times when we can pause and step back and switch the parenting to like not what you don't want your kids to know, but what do you want your kids to know? And switching the focus instead of blocking, but like actually actively parenting the way you want to parent. Because a lot of blocking isn't active parenting, it's just getting out there and like turning off things and not allowing things and things like that. But instead, like actively deciding what you want your kids to know, what you want your kids to experience, what you want your kids to consider, and creating that atmosphere.
I love that. I think blocking is more the reactivity in us, like gotta block, gotta protect. Whereas like what you were saying, what do I want them to know? That's more thoughtful and intentional. And I think that's really, I think that's the essence of mixed faith parenting is getting out of the reactivity and becoming more thoughtful. What do I want in this partner relationship? What do I want as a parent? What can I do? What can I control? I love that. I'll just say what I see with couples often is they're like, oh yeah, I'll give my spouse space to share, but we have to do it together. And I need to know ahead of time what you're going to share. And we have to talk about it. We have to be on the same page. I hear this all the time. And that's kind of like the illusion of giving your spouse space, but you're not really giving them space because I think everybody needs breathing room to parent and try things and experiment, right? Like maybe you overshare and your kid kind of freaks out. Well, that's a learning experience for you of like, okay, maybe my kid's not quite ready and maybe I didn't do that the right way, right? So each parent needs the chance to kind of feel things out and learn, and to develop their own relationship with the kid that's not under the scrutiny of the other parent. So I think just giving everyone spaciousness to explore and parent, and that requires a lot of trust in your spouse to be like, I'm going to let you just try parent the way you want to, see how it goes. If I have concerns, maybe we can talk about it, but giving plenty of spaciousness and not that kind of micromanaging how and when and under what circumstances it's done. I think it'd be hard, but I think it's helpful to everyone, including the kids, to develop those unique relationships with their parents. So all of this brings up discomfort, whether you're on the believing side or non-believing side. It can be uncomfortable when your spouse shares their testimony, their faith. It can be uncomfortable when the non-believing spouse shares things that they disagree with. How do you manage your own self when you're uncomfortable with sharing or not sharing or whatever's happening regarding this topic? Any thoughts?
I'll jump in. My answer is really simple. And that's like, sometimes you have to look at, for instance, I think something you just said that is so important, this idea that you have to be on the same page. I think it's a myth. I think it's a myth that causes discomfort and anxiety and fear. When you can root that out and let go of that, then you are so much better off in the relationship. So I would start with things like that, like what's causing you so much discomfort and fear and anxiety, so that you're not able to, let your spouse be a parent or express their authentic self or whatever it may be. I think a lot of times it's just letting go of some thoughts that just aren't serving us, like we have to be on the same page regarding parenting.
Agree. I think that's one of the hardest thoughts to to have. And it's simply not, it's not useful. So how do we manage our own discomfort? One thing is just to focus on what can I do to regulate me? Taking a deep breath, walking away, making sure that I'm taking care of my self-care. Am I getting enough sleep? Am I having social outlets? Making sure that I am showing up with what I need so I can regulate myself. Also, getting some backup, some professional support, if that's through a coach, if it's through a therapist, a couples counselor. This stuff can be very uncomfortable, and having that backup, it is very beneficial.
Yeah, and I think so much of our discomfort is the nervous system response. This is the body response. And bringing our kind of cognitive self online can kind of help kind of manage that. So thinking about some of the things we've talked about, like when you're feeling that discomfort because your spouse is sharing differently than you would like, thinking about, is this good or bad? Maybe, I don't know, who's to say? I can't control my spouse. I can't control my kid. Uh, I want to show up as a partner that is spacious and allows people to parent and allows that relationship to be its own thing. Really just bringing your kind of thoughtfulness to help you manage the feeling part of your body. We want the feelings and the thoughts to kind of come together to help us be more intentional people and not just reactive, is how I like to think of it. So let's talk about this worry that the kids are going to be confused. I hear this all the time. We don't want to confuse the kids. What if the kids are confused because we're sharing different beliefs? What are your thoughts on parents sharing different perspectives and the kids being confused?
This is so common. It's just as common as we should be on the same page. Like
Mhm.
they're both so common. And so this makes me think of that parable you shared earlier is something I've shared with my clients, specifically in this particular regard. Because like we don't know. Like we don't know. We don't know if confusion is good or bad. Like a lot of times we just assume it's bad and that kids being confused is a bad thing. And I like to present the opposite and say, maybe this is the best thing that is ever going to happen to your kids. Maybe they're going to be able to see that mom and dad can love each other even with these differences. And maybe that would mean for them that they can be loved regardless in this family, even if they choose something that mom and dad don't 100% agree to, and that love is still available to them. Maybe that's much more of a benefit than being confused ever is. It's I think this is worth questioning. We go in with some beliefs and they cause us pain and suffering, as opposed to helping us take care of our kids, be gentle and kind with ourselves, be gentle and kind with our spouses. And I think this is one that can lead to us being less than kind, because then we start to be controlling and we start to be fearful and we start to be rigid and all of the things that we've talked about already.
And going off of what you said, I love the question, flipping it instead of what if this is causing confusion? What if this is actually one of the greatest gifts that we can give our children? I kind of think of being in a mixed faith marriage or family, kind of like being in a bilingual home, that you've got two parents speaking two different languages, and how amazing it is that those children can learn both languages, and then they get to figure out how they want to use it. And I think we're actually giving them a gift of being more critical thinkers, helping them to be more empathetic, helping them to make decisions. So changing this lens of this is a problem, it's confusing, looking at it, how is this a gift?
Yeah. I'll share my own personal experience with this. I grew up in my parents were both members, but they had very conflicting beliefs. My dad's views were very out of the box. Their beliefs were very against each other, and it was uncomfortable. Like I knew that it was upsetting for my mom, that my dad believed a certain way. So I grew up with that, both of them teaching me different things. And so I reached out to all my siblings to ask them this question. Was it confusing for you, and how did you navigate it? And it was fascinating. So there's 6 of us. I know for me personally, I remember being confused, and I actually turned to prayer and found peace. My sister, and it's ironic because I'm the one who's no longer believing. My sister, who is very believing, very traditional, she actually remembers feeling that tension, that conflict and confusion, but she turned to her logic and kind of found her way to navigate it logically, like, oh, these are both fine ways to live, so it's okay. Either way is good. So I think the confusion helps kids find their own capacity, their own inner resources to navigate confusion. And that's a really good thing. Like when I was thinking about that, I was like, wow, I did that when I was young. Like I found my way through that. Cool. That's a great thing for kids to do. One of my brothers said, I didn't even know they had different beliefs at the time. Like totally unaware. So I think that also shows that sometimes as parents, we freak out, like my kids are going to be confused, but that's not even what the kids are noticing or caring about. Their minds might be in, what matters to them is so different that they may not even notice at all. My older brother didn't. And my older sister also said that she doesn't even really remember any confusion. So it's interesting just to kind of see the differences. And so I think, like you said, Brooke, you said we take everything so seriously. And I think we can just relax about the confusion. Like they'll find their way through it. I totally learned to speak 2 different languages with my parents regarding their different beliefs. Kids will find their way through it, or they may not even notice, may not be a thing for them at all. So I thought that was interesting.
I think what they do notice is how we treat each other.
And that's what I know. That's what I remember is less about the confusion and more that I knew that my mom was not happy with my dad and vice versa.
And I think just being able to create a situation where, we have totally different opinions, and that's okay. We still respect each other. We're still kind to each other. We can set boundaries. We can make requests. And our children are going to remember more how they felt, if they felt safe, if they could feel heard, if we were undermining each other. I think those are the things that they notice how they feel. I think safety is a key thing, that we can help our children feel safe even though we have very different beliefs.
Yeah.
And I want to piggyback on that. Like, what's wrong with feeling confused? What's wrong with feeling negative emotions? Like, children, there's nothing wrong with them feeling negative emotions. That doesn't mean you're parenting wrong. That doesn't mean that anything's wrong. It just means they're having a human experience. And confusion is an emotion they need to learn how to navigate just as well as happiness or contentment.
Absolutely. It's normal. I'm confused every day.
Yeah. Join the club.
Love that. All right. Any other thoughts, tips, or advice for sharing beliefs, thoughts, perspectives with your kids?
I have one based on what we were just talking about. It's like kids are resilient. I'm not saying like put trauma on your children and layer it and layer it and layer it. But like kids are resilient. We don't need to be perfect parents. And when we expect ourselves to be perfect parents, like we suffer, they suffer. It's no fun. But kids need to learn coping mechanisms. Kids need to learn how to deal with negative emotions. Kids need to learn how to think critically when there's two different opinions presented to them. Like, these are all things that are not just they need to, but like, developmentally appropriate for kids to navigate and work through. And as parents, we can guide them and consult with them and advise them and influence them on those things, or we can make it much harder for them. And I think so much here is just like chilling out, stepping into the advisor role, giving them some tools and some ideas, loving them regardless, and letting the mess of humanity be okay and acceptable and space for it.
And I would add to that, there are a lot of times in relationships where we have what is referred to as a rupture. We have a problem, there is an injury, things have not gone well. And that is inevitable in relationships. And there is always the opportunity for repair. I cannot tell you how many things I wished I wouldn't have said or things that I wished I wouldn't have done. And I've been able to go back and attempt to make a repair. And through that rupture and repair, that's where we grow. That's where there's so much beauty in that repair. And I'm so thankful for that. I'm thankful. I'm thankful for my kids that have let me screw up and that I can go to them and say, you know what? I did the best with what I had, and that wasn't so great. And I'm sorry. And to be able to continue and to build on that, there is so much beauty in that, that we don't have it all figured out, and you are going to screw up. And they're being able to go in and say, you know what, I was wrong. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. How much they're learning from me owning where I messed up and apologizing and trying to heal things. So that repair is a beautiful part of relationships, and I'm so thankful for that.
Beautifully said. And I'll just end with, I think for me, mixed faith parenting has become so much easier when I've just shifted out of reactivity. So I'm no longer reacting to like, well, the church is teaching this, they have a lesson about this, so I have to counter with this. And it's D&C year, so now I got to tell my kids about Joseph Smith polygamy. And I'm no longer reacting to what's happening, and I'm just thoughtful. What do I think, like you were saying, Brooke, I'm not blocking anymore. What do I want my kids to know? And when do I want them to know it? And I'm taking a step back and just observing my kids. Like right now, I see them critically thinking about church. Like they'll come home and say, this is weird, that blah, blah, blah. And so I know they're thinking about things. So I'm like, okay, I don't need to step in. They're developing that ability to think about things. And I'm looking, are they hearing other points of view in different places? Is their whole world church, or is it wider than that? And for my kids, it's wider. So I'm taking in information, I'm making thoughtful choices about how much, when, and why I share. And it doesn't even feel anxiety provoking for me or stressful. And it's not hurtful to our relationship anymore because there's like my own why behind it. My husband's got his why behind how and what he shares. And it's like so much has been relieved for me personally. So it's been a good journey so far. Again, who knows? In a year, I may be freaking out about things, who knows? But that's where I'm at. So thank you, ladies. And we will do this again next month on a different topic. Until next time.